The date was November 22, 1963. It was a Friday. The world was about to change forever. President John F. Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States. He was young, charismatic, and full of vision. He represented a new generation of leadership. Many saw him as a symbol of hope and progress. He spoke of a new frontier for America. His presidency was often called Camelot. It felt like a time of great possibility. But on that day in Dallas, Texas, that hopeful era would come to a sudden and violent end. The story of what happened is etched into the memory of a nation. It is a story of a bright morning that turned into the darkest of afternoons. This was a political trip for the president. He was looking ahead to the 1964 election. Texas was a crucial state. He needed to mend some political fences within the Democratic Party there. He traveled with his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. First Lady Jackie Kennedy was a picture of grace and style. She was beloved by the American public. Also with them were Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. They were all riding together. They were part of a long motorcade. They would drive through the city. They would greet the crowds. Then, the president would give a speech at the Dallas Trade Mart. No one could have imagined that he would never make it there. The events of that day are not just history. They are a deep wound in the American psyche. For those who lived through it, the memory is vivid. They remember where they were. They remember what they were doing when they heard the news. The assassination of a president is a national trauma, but the death of JFK felt different. It felt personal to so many. He was not just a leader. He was a part of their families, seen on the black and white television sets in their living rooms. The day began with promise. President Kennedy in Fort Worth. The First Lady in Fort Worth. A light rain had fallen overnight. The skies were clearing. The president gave an impromptu speech to a crowd outside his hotel. His mood was upbeat, charming and relaxed. He joked with the crowd. There are no faint hearts in Fort Worth. After a formal breakfast, they flew to Dallas on Air Force One. Air Force One touched down at Love Field around 11:40 a.m. The sun was now shining, warm and clear. As the president and Mrs. Kennedy stepped off the plane, a wave of applause greeted them. A large, enthusiastic crowd had gathered on the tarmac. Jackie was presented with a bouquet of red roses. She was wearing a now iconic pink Chanel suit. She wore a matching pillbox hat. She looked radiant. The president, in a dark suit, smiled. He waved. The reception was warm, even loving. There had been concerns about Dallas's political climate, fears of hostile protests. But the scene at Love Field put those worries to rest. The welcome was overwhelmingly positive. The president and First Lady spent minutes shaking hands. They moved along a fence line, greeting the well-wishers. This was classic Kennedy. He thrived on personal contact. Secret Service agents were nearby, but the atmosphere was festive, not tense. The smiles on the faces of the Dallas citizens were genuine, excited and proud. For a few moments, politics faded. The energy was electric. After greeting the crowd, it was time to depart for the motorcade. The presidential limousine was waiting. The motorcade pulled away from Love Field shortly before noon. It was a long procession of cars, police motorcycles, the presidential limousine, cars for Secret Service agents, vehicles for Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, cars for reporters and other officials. The planned route was about 10 miles long. It was designed to wind through downtown Dallas. This would allow the maximum number of people to see the president. The final destination was the Dallas Trade Mart. There, President Kennedy was scheduled to deliver a luncheon address. The route had been published in the local newspapers. Everyone knew where the president would be. As the motorcade moved from the outskirts into the city, the crowds grew larger. People lined the streets, sometimes several rows deep. They stood on sidewalks. They waved from office windows. They held up signs. The mood was joyous. People cheered and applauded as the president's car went by. President Kennedy was clearly enjoying the reception. He smiled broadly and waved continuously. He often pointed into the crowd, acknowledging individuals. At one point, Nellie Connally, the governor's wife, turned to him. "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you," she said. The president smiled. "No, you can't," he replied. Those would be among the last words he ever spoke. The final turn of the route was approaching. It was a sharp left turn onto Elm Street. The motorcade proceeded down Main Street. The skyscrapers of downtown Dallas towered over the procession. The cheering was loud and constant. Then, the lead cars made a slow, careful right turn onto Houston Street. This brought them to the edge of a wide, grassy area known as Dealey Plaza. The plaza was an open space, framed by several key buildings. To the right was the Dallas County Courthouse. Straight ahead was a triple underpass that would take the motorcade onto the Stemmons Freeway, and to the left, on the corner of Houston and Elm, stood a 7-story reddish brick building. It was the Texas School Book Depository. The motorcade traveled down Houston Street for 1 block. The time was 12:29 p.m. The presidential limousine following the lead cars made the sharp 120-degree left turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street. This turn was a slow one. The big car had to reduce its speed significantly to make the corner. As it straightened out on Elm Street, it began to descend a gentle slope toward the triple underpass. The crowds in this area were thinner than in the main downtown section. But there were still people scattered on the grass. One man, Abraham Zapruder, was filming the motorcade with his home movie camera. He stood on a concrete pedestal to get a better view. For a few seconds, everything was perfect. The president was smiling and waving to the small group of people on his right. Mrs. Kennedy, in her bright pink suit, smiled beside him. The car was moving at only about 11 miles per hour. The president raised his right hand to wave. It was a moment of connection, a final image of a vibrant leader engaging with his people. Then, the world broke apart. As the limousine passed in front of the Texas School Book Depository, the first shot rang out. The sound was sharp, like a firecracker or a car backfiring. Many in the crowd, and even in the motorcade, did not immediately recognize it as a gunshot. They looked around, confused, but President Kennedy's reaction was instant. His hands flew up to his throat, his face contorted in pain. He seemed to lurch forward. Governor Connolly, sitting in front of him, also reacted. He knew immediately it was a rifle shot. He started to turn to his right to see the president. He never completed the turn. Another shot hit him in the back. He cried out, "Oh no, 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 my God, they're going to kill us all!" He slumped over into his wife's lap. The presidential limousine was still moving slowly down Elm Street. For a terrifying 5.6 seconds, there was a pause. Then came the third, fatal shot. This one struck President Kennedy in the back of the head. The impact was devastating and horrific. Mrs. Kennedy, who was leaning toward her husband, was splattered with blood and tissue. Her scream was lost in the echoing sound of the rifle blast. In that single, brutal moment, the president was killed. The home movie taken by Abraham Zapruder captured the terrible event in graphic detail. It showed the president's body being thrown violently backward and to the left. The nation's dream of Camelot was extinguished in a fraction of a second. The nightmare had begun. Panic erupted in Dealey Plaza. People in the crowd screamed. They dropped to the ground seeking cover. They grabbed their children. Some ran away from the sounds. The presidential limousine sped down the Stemmons Freeway. It covered the 4 miles to Parkland Memorial Hospital in just a few minutes. Motorcycle police sirens wailed, clearing a path through the traffic. The car screeched to a halt at the hospital's emergency entrance. Agent Clint Hill was still perched on the back. Inside the car, the scene was grim. Governor Connolly was moaning in pain. President Kennedy was motionless, his head resting in his wife's lap. His eyes were open, but they were fixed and unseeing. His wife refused to let go of him, her pink suit stained with his blood. Hospital staff rushed out with stretchers. They carefully lifted the president onto a gurney and rushed him into Trauma Room 1. A team of doctors was assembled immediately. They worked frantically to save him, but his injuries were catastrophic. The wound to his head was massive. He was not breathing. He had no pulse. They performed a tracheotomy to try to create an airway. They administered fluids. They started chest compressions. They did everything humanly possible. But it was no use. The damage was too severe. The president had essentially been killed instantly by the headshot. The efforts at Parkland were a desperate, hopeless attempt to reverse the irreversible. Mrs. Kennedy waited just outside the trauma room. A Catholic priest, Father Oscar Huber, was called to administer the last rites. He performed the sacrament over the president's body. Mrs. Kennedy was allowed to enter the room. She placed her wedding ring on her husband's finger. The official time of death was pronounced, 1:00 p.m. But everyone in that room knew he had been gone long before. While doctors fought to save the president at Parkland Hospital, a massive manhunt was underway in Dallas. Witnesses in Dealey Plaza had looked up at the Texas School Book Depository building right after the shots. Several people saw a man with a rifle in a 6th-floor window. Police officers immediately sealed off the building and began a floor-by-floor search. On the 6th floor, near a corner window overlooking Elm Street, they found a chilling scene. 3 spent rifle cartridges were on the floor. Nearby, hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a rifle. It was a 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano, an Italian-made military surplus weapon. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald. He was 24 years old. He had started working at the book depository about a month earlier. He was a former U.S. Marine who had once defected to the Soviet Union only to return to the United States. After the shooting, Oswald had calmly left the building during the chaos. He walked several blocks, then boarded a city bus. Oswald's next encounter was with Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. About 45 minutes after the assassination, Tippit was patrolling the Oak Cliff neighborhood when he spotted a man who matched the suspect description. As the officer got out of his car, Oswald pulled out his pistol. He fired 4 shots, killing Officer Tippit instantly. Witnesses directed the police toward a nearby movie theater, the Texas Theater. Police surrounded the building. They turned up the house lights. An employee pointed out Oswald, who was sitting alone in the back. As officers approached him, Oswald stood up and struggled, attempting to pull his pistol again, but the officers overpowered him. They arrested him and took him out of the theater. Lee Harvey Oswald was in custody. It was less than 90 minutes after he had shot the president.